Hello! It took me forever to find time to make the voiceover for this video, so it's been a minute since my last one, and a little minute since I actually painted this. I've been pretty busy with some different projects lately, but I hope you've been well. In today's video, I want to talk about 5 tips that have helped me with acrylic painting. I want to start off by saying I'm definitely not an expert. Acrylic painting might be one of my least formally researched and learned mediums that I use, but acrylics are also a super forgiving medium that a lot of people use in really loose ways or whatever way they want, really. So I think I can definitely share some things that have helped me along my journey of figuring out how to make paintings that I want to make using acrylics. My first tip that honestly helped me a lot when I first heard it, it's simple, but it's to always have a little bit of water on your brush. You don't need a lot. You want to dip it in your water cup and then dry it off partially so that you have a brush that's wet but not dripping. And you always want to mix in a tiny bit of water with your paint, just a little. It helps everything flow a little bit nicer, and it honestly makes a big difference in the application of the paint and helps things go along a lot smoother. My next tip is to get a tiny spray bottle, or find a regular size spray bottle that you already have, but they do have tiny ones at the Dollar Tree. And what you want to do is you want to spritz your palette. I can't say enough how helpful it is and how helpful it was to me when I first found out about this. It really helps keep your paint mixes from drying on you sooner than you want, and it helps keep everything workable. You don't want to spray too often since acrylics aren't water activated like something like gouaches, but keeping your work time just a little more open is really helpful. If you're working with actual canvas as well, you can actually spritz the back of the fabric, and when it dries, it will tighten up on the canvas and make it nice and taut. And if you paint on it before the water on the back dries, it actually helps your paint stay open on your canvas and wet for longer. My third tip is also about a material, but I promise they aren't all, and it is to use gesso. It's not a must for all artists, but it's definitely a personal must for me. If you aren't familiar, gesso, spelled G-E-S-S-O, is an acrylic primer, and it makes your surface have the perfect level of absorbency for the paint. It also makes the colors show up better, things mix more easily on top of it, and just all sorts of good stuff. It gives the surface a little bit of a tooth too if you want, or you can sand it down with some fine-tooth sandpaper to make it more smooth. It's pretty versatile, and it always helps me. I've found that it makes a huge difference in the way that the paint applies, and it also gives you a more uniform experience across different surfaces. So what I mean by that is, personally, I'm especially someone that likes to work on a really large variety of surfaces, whether it be paper, canvas, wood, hardboard, anything else. I can still pick up on ways that the paint behaves and learn things that will be universal across whatever surface I'm working on, rather than every time I'm using something different, kind of having to learn how the paint behaves on that specific material. Knowing what I can expect is a huge benefit to me. When you're working on pre-gessoed canvases, it's not 100% necessary to add your own gesso, but if you're working on paper or wood, I cannot urge you enough to go out and get some gesso the first chance you have and start applying 2 to 4 layers of it to your surface every time. Wood and paper in particular just soak up the paint so much, I've found, and it makes a huge difference to have a surface that can actually handle acrylics. You can get it at any art supply store, and I personally have always used the Liquitex brand gesso, and at first I started with the Liquitex Basics gesso, which is the student grade option, and now I use Liquitex Professional. Either one works great, and you should also be able to easily find options in white, which is what I use, or there's also clear and even black gesso. Tip number 4, learn to mix your colors from the primaries if you don't already. And I honestly recommend very frequently working from the primary colors and only using convenience colors when you know you love using that particular color, either straight from the tube or close to it. Once you start getting into more high quality brands of acrylics, they will list the actual pigment numbers in the paint, and you want to opt for paints with as few pigments as possible. This is something that I honestly do across all of the different types of paints that I use. And at that point, once you start getting into more professional paints, I can recommend branching out into more than just a split primary palette, but honestly you might not even want to right away, because paints can get pretty expensive when they are the professional grade ones, and you'll find that almost every color you would want you can get from just a split primary palette. If you don't know what a split primary palette is, it's just a warm and a cool version of every primary color. So red, magenta, a warm or orangey yellow, a lighter lemon yellow, cyan, and then a primary blue like ultramarine. You can also, of course, use white, and some painters will add a dark brown for convenience as well, and you can definitely do that. Those are the only paint colors you really need to get started, and they can make anything else that you need. To be totally honest, I have a lot more colors, but I'm still personally using pretty much just primaries for every acrylic painting, including the one that you're watching right now. If anyone is interested in me making a tutorial, please let me know in the comments. I can absolutely go more in depth about how I have personally found that it works for me to mix things like skin tones and such, and I can talk about that a little bit more in its own video. So what is the actual benefit of using a split primary palette aside from having to buy less paints? Why am I recommending it? Well, it is because acrylics can have a tendency to get really muddy and dull very quickly. You want to keep your paint mixes using as few pigments as possible to keep your colors nice and bright and clear. I also highly recommend learning to mix using only primaries before branching out into more colors, because you can learn to really intuitively adjust your mixes using just complementary colors to darken things or tone things down, and you can get a lot more variation in your values and in your tones and just everything going on if you know exactly how to tweak things into a certain direction. And you can learn how to do that, and it can become a part of second nature when you really limit what paints you're actually using to get your colors. My fifth and final tip is to experiment with brushes and brush shapes. I'm a big advocate for playing around in your sketchbook, especially with paints, before going on to your final surface. But when it comes to acrylic painting, brushes themselves can actually make a big difference. With something like watercolors, you can be totally set with just like 1 to 3 round brushes, but with acrylics, your brushes are just different ways to scoop paint onto the canvas, basically. Like, you can even use your fingers, so you might find a large variety of shapes and sizes really helpful. I don't take most of my watercolor brushes anywhere near acrylics, and instead, when I'm using acrylics, I actually mostly use just the biggest and cheapest variety pack that I could find in the art store, and they're perfect. I gravitate toward a small amount of them more than the rest, but getting a large variety is how I found which shapes and sizes I really like the most. Acrylic brushes really don't have to be expensive at all, so playing around will help a lot. So those are the acrylic painting tips that I have found have probably helped me the most throughout learning to use this medium. I hope that these helped you, or that you at least just enjoyed watching this video. Either way, thank you so much for spending some time with me. Please let me know if there's any videos you'd like to see from me in the future, and if you enjoyed this one, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more of what I put out, and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything, because I don't upload on a schedule currently. You can also check out all my links and my shop in the description. Thank you so much for coming by, and I will see you next time. Bye bye!